Hey everyone, it's time for another live look at the astrology. My name is Katie Sweetman, and this is your look at the astrology of January 9th through 15th, 2022. So, Happy New Year again. We are getting into the middle of January. How does time fly? I don't know. I hope you all are well. I hope you all are in kind of adjusting to this new calendar that we're in, and we've got a lot of big astrology kind of coming down the pipeline, which we'll talk about in a moment. And of course, this week we have Mars finally turning direct. And as somebody who is Mars ruled, I'm a Scorpio, I'm really looking forward to Mars turning direct after 2 months retrograde in Gemini. So yeah, if you're watching live, always say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. Even if you're not watching live, just say hi. Where are you watching from? It's nice to know that we are a global audience. I know some of you are my clients. You're like, Katie, I watch you religiously every week. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. And some of you even watch me in other parts of the world. I know it's morning in Australia, but here in the New York City area where I am located, it is evening time, and it's we're in winter. Miss the sunshine of summer. So yeah, I see some familiar faces in the live chat. How are you all doing with this astrology? We had a Cancer full moon just a few days ago, so that one really puts an emphasis on emotions and home and family in the past, and sometimes these complicated memories and emotions, because we had some Chiron that was part of this full moon energy. But like I said, this week our big headliner is Mars turning retrograde in Gemini, which we'll get to in a moment. But just for those who do not know who I am, my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer and psychic medium located in the New York City area. I'm just outside of New York City, across the river in New Jersey. And every week we gather live to look at the astrology, and something that you hear me say over and over again: the astrology is 50%. You are the other 50%. We all have to be a participant. But sometimes, especially when we get contact to the lunar nodes like we do this week, life just can sometimes feel a little bit bigger than us. It doesn't mean that we can't have a little bit of agency, a little bit of choice in this. And I think, speaking of choice, especially as we have Mercury retrograde, as we are coming out of Mars retrograde this week, we're really reflecting on choice. Because after all, Mercury and the sign that it rules, Gemini, this is a sign of choice. It's about the duality of life and having to see things from two different perspectives. But yeah, you are the other 50%. It's like when I look at somebody's astrology chart, there's nothing telling me that there's an actual human being that's connected to this chart. It could just be a figure of energy. Anyway, getting off on a tangent. So let's look at the astrology for this week. As I mentioned, we've got Mars turning direct. We've got Venus. Venus is going to be, it's in Aquarius, and it's going to be coming up to what's called a square to the lunar nodes, and it will also make a square to Uranus later this week. That energy activates eclipse energy. If you remember, we had a solar eclipse in Scorpio back on October 25th, and we had a lunar eclipse in Taurus back on November 8th, and we even had eclipses back in April and May of 2022. So these are moments that thread back to different points of time. And even I think we had that solar eclipse in Taurus at 10 degrees. So maybe something from April, May is coming forward this week. We'll have to see. But yeah, what else we got this week? We've got Mercury. It's making us another square to Chiron. Mercury's in Capricorn, which we'll get to in a moment. But yeah, let's look at the astrology of, think about it, January 9th through 15th, 2023. So as I was saying a few moments ago, we are getting into this new year. Remember, Capricorn season is a time to do the things that we're supposed to do, air quotes, meaning how do we want to lay a foundation for the year ahead? What's the new bar, or what's the new, let's say, measure that we want to hold ourselves up to in the new year. Sounds like pressure, but I'm doing my due diligence for Saturn. Saturn is the planet that rules Capricorn, and Saturn reminds us that, life is short. We got to get our ducks in a row. We have to get things organized, put things back into balance, step into a sense of integrity and authority, and to live our lives in a state of, I know it's like a high bar, a state of mastery. It doesn't always, especially a few moments ago when I can't speak, mastery isn't something that comes easy, but that is really the long path with Saturn and by extension Capricorn. So on a smaller scale, how do we want to be masters the best that we can of our life, of our lives in 2023? We got a few things on the horizon, which I alluded to when we started the show. We're going to have a couple of big shifts in March. So as we get closer to March, I'm just going to kind of lay some breadcrumbs. We've got Saturn changing sign, our friend Saturn changing signs on March 7th. And this is followed by Pluto making its first dip into Aquarius in 250 years. And this will be on March 23rd. And then even on March 25th, Mars will finally leave Gemini and go into Cancer. So in total, we're having Mars for about 7 months in Gemini, and that's atypical. Typically Mars is about 5 or 6 weeks in a sign. And what is Mars? Well, Mars is the planet of drive and action, power, motivation. It sort of gets us to sit in the driver's seat, to put our foot on the gas, hopefully. But we haven't been able to do that over, the past 2 months because Mars has been retrograde. So as we start the week, January 9th, even though Mars is still retrograde, we are coming up to that moment where Mars does turn direct on January 12th. And it's good for us to start to reflect on this journey of Mars in Gemini and also Mars retrograde. So Mars first went into Gemini back on August 20th. So that's the start of our story. Then Mars turned retrograde on October 30th. It's another part of our story, and maybe events or themes that are bunching up around that time. With Mars retrograde over the last 2 months, we can't move fast. We can't necessarily move forward in the way that we want to move forward. We have to reflect. We have to deliberate. We have to be intentional. Gemini, again, is a sign of choice. It sort of gets us to fact find. It's maybe more the Virgo side of things than the Gemini side of things. But typically, Gemini is a sign where we gather information. We try out different things. And with Mars retrograde, we just can't work on Mars on a level of instinct. If we have to be, again, more deliberate, more intentional, we have to maybe be aware of how our actions impact others, the power of our words, how we use our voice. Sometimes we don't use our voice. And this is, as Mars prepares to turn direct, this is another stepping stone in the story. And this, of course, will take us into March when Mars finally leaves Gemini on the 25th of March. And that, wherever Gemini is in your astrology, even though you might be saying, Katie, I'm not a Gemini. I know, but you have Gemini somewhere in your astrology. That's how it works. You are all 12 signs, not just your sun sign. Do remember that the zodiac is the wheel of life. It is a symbolic representation of everything that happens in creation, everything that happens potentially in your life. So somewhere, which when we go through each of the 12 signs, and I'll refresh you, somewhere Gemini is sort of is standing in for a part of your life. And that part, it's just typically restless, it's curious, it wants to try new things, it wants to learn, it wants to travel, it wants to explore, wants to be chatty. That might be your relationship sign. That might be your career sign, for example. So we'll get to that in a moment. And so these are the things that are in the background as we start the week. And as we do start the week, we have what's called Venus trine Mars. Trine energy is typically opportunities. It can make things flow. It can open doors. But then we have to take the energy and do something with it. We have to make it lived. So Venus trine Mars is typically a little flirty. It's a chatty, it's sociable, it can be a little sexy depending on the signs. In this case, this is what's called an air trine. So air trines are much more social. They're much more driven to connect and to experience, as opposed to, let's say, the tactileness of an earth sign, or even the emotional connection of a water sign, for example. Then we go into the 11th, January 11th, and we have a couple of things going on. Number one is Mercury, which is retrograde. It'll be retrograde until January 18th. It's coming back to a square to Chiron. So this sort of brings again this thread of Chiron into this week. We saw this last week, or felt this last week. Sometimes when Chiron's present, we kind of feel the ache of something, sort of this emotional pain point. Sometimes it's really hard to really pinpoint it. It can be a little bit in the background. It can speak to a really old story that keeps coming up. In this case, what is Chiron? Well, it could be a pain point, something that we have to heal. Chiron and Aries, we have to have the courage and bravery to do something, or to stand up for ourselves, or to be an individual. Mercury, planet of voice and communication. Sometimes we need to have difficult conversations, and that hits on a deeper emotional point. And the other thing to keep in mind, especially as I think the moon goes into Virgo, I think it's on Tuesday, Tuesday and Wednesday it's in Virgo, is that we get this, let's say, earthy energy between the Virgo moon and the Capricorn sun around midweek. When you have that energy, it's very practical, it's very grounded. It's like, how do we get our human lives in order, take care of stuff, make investments? And since it's Capricorn season, again, we have to set a rather high bar for ourselves. Mercury is currently in Capricorn, and so the high bar is also set around our voice, the choices that we make. We have to be on top of the choices that we're making, and maybe we're also, reflecting on some pretty serious choices. Capricorn is a serious sign as Mercury turns retrograde. And with the Chiron energy, maybe these choices are not so simple. Maybe they hit on a lot of deeper emotional themes or deeper emotional pain points. Also on the 11th, Venus, which is currently in Aquarius, it makes something called a square to the lunar nodes. So you may not even know what the lunar nodes are, but it's important. They're, for me at least, one of the most important places in the sky, because they talk about a universal collective compass point. Where are we all collectively headed towards? Well, the North Node is in Taurus right now. It's been in Taurus since January of 2022. Collectively, we need to find solid ground. We need to get back to our bodies. We need to develop a different relationship with touch and taste and smell and sensuality, and maybe even getting into these deeper themes around security, stability, or sort of the rebirth and the fertility of life, especially in contrast perhaps to the past few years that we've had. So the North Node's been in Taurus, which means we've been having eclipses in Taurus and by extension Scorpio, which is where the South Node is right now. We've been having eclipses since the end of 2021, but throughout 2022, Taurus and Scorpio, two signs that talk about life and death, rebirth, decay. These are two signs that form what's called the fixed cross, which is the cross of the material world and manifestation. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent for a moment, but with the North Node there, it is very much about our human lives. And I think especially with some other energy, it's a little bit bigger conversation. That's why we've seen some titanic shifts in the past couple of years. Maybe the things that we never thought would change or shift or move, maybe they've changed, shift, or moved since 2021. But here we are, we're a new year. And Venus, which rules Taurus, is now making something called a square 90 degrees to the nodes this week. Something that I've noticed when Venus squares the nodes, it does bring up these deeper themes around relationships, whether it's one-on-one relationships or romantic relationships. And this is the week where sometimes there's let's say, a fated encounter. Somebody comes into our life, somebody leaves our life. Maybe we hear from somebody that we haven't heard from in ages. The notes are kind of funny. They talk about the arc of fate. And that's why, I said when we started our time together, there are some times where the astrology is bigger than us, and the lunar nodes are bigger than us. They talk about these forces of evolution and change and sort of these threads of time that go back years. And that's why, when Venus makes contact to the nodes, relationships can be at a crossroads. A connection can be at the crossroads. Or maybe it's financial, because Venus is also a planet around money and income. And we need to shift our relationship with money and income, or maybe make an investment that is a big point in what's going on in our lives right now. So pay attention to the story that's coming up. Then we get into the 12th of January, and finally, Mars turns direct at 8 degrees of Gemini. So as I was saying in the introduction, when Mars was retrograde, it wasn't time to hit the gas. It was actually time to pump the brakes. And I think with Mars in this very long square to Neptune and Pisces, one of the things that what I feel is part of this retrograde period is, how do we make peace with the fact that we can't always get what we want? I realize that's a song, but that's a little bit what Neptune gets at, is that we have to sort of come to peace, or to come, within ourselves, that there are forces that are greater than us. There are things that are larger than us, and we can't always go after what we want. We have to, or even to let things to come to us instead of having to go to them. So Neptune has really questioned us on how we use our Mars. Are we typically overusing our Mars? Like, we have to be in control. We have to go after what we want. We have to get all the things. We have to be the hunter. Mars is the hunter. But Neptune says, is this for your highest good? Do you really want this? Maybe it's been a time to reflect on desire. What do you desire? Do you desire? Do you have a relationship with desire? Or is that energy not present? Does it need to come back into your life? So with Mars turning direct, it may feel like the things that haven't been moving suddenly are moving. So things that have been sort of, let's say, no wind in the sails, so to speak, suddenly have some wind in the sails. What I've noticed with past Mars going direct, sometimes you can have like a flash of Mars energy. People get a little ill-tempered, a little short with their words, especially in Gemini, because we want things now. We want things fast. And that's typically what Gemini is. It's a give it to me now type of sign. It moves very quickly. It's ruled by Mercury. So with that in mind, be sort of present with how Mars is showing up in your life. Are you getting sort of hot-tempered? Are you getting frustrated? Or are you ready to go, ready to move, ready to hit the gas, so to speak? Mars, it's still in this long, let's say, square to Neptune. This does take us into March. And with that in mind, maybe we had to learn some powerful lessons over the past 2 months. And with that in mind, how do we take very different actions over the next 2 months? And how do we make different choices over the next 2 months? Then we have Venus, as I alluded to earlier. It made that square to the nodes, and then it will make something called a square to Uranus. So as you've heard me talk about from time to time, we've been in this story that began in May of 2018, March of 2019. Those were the 2 months that Uranus first went into Taurus, a sign that had not been in since the 1930s and 40s. So it's kind of a big deal. Uranus is an evolutionary planet, which means its job is to get us to grow and evolve a relationship with money, income, material stability, material security. That sense of security and stability in our lives, the world. Certainly there's been a lot of big shifts in the past few years. I think we can all agree on that. That said, whatever is happening this week as Venus makes a square to Uranus may tick back to these different points throughout 2018, 2019, and even 2020 and 2021 and 2022 as well. Venus and Uranus can be electric. It can illuminate. It can shake us awake. It can get us to see things differently, to value things differently, to connect to people differently. And that's the thing about Venus, planet relationships and money, and Uranus. We can't keep doing things the way that we've been doing them. Typically Taurus, and by extension Venus, is a planet and a sign that wants to keep things the same. There's nothing wrong with that. That's, that sense of reliability is what allows life to flourish. We don't have to worry about stuff. But it's not to say that we have to let go of stability this week or even throughout different points in this year. But it's like, how do we do it differently? How do we rebuild, or let's say, so the story that you hear me say over and over again, 2019, March 2019, when Uranus went back into Taurus, quit my job of 20 years to be an astrologer. That was my way of reinventing the wheel and earning a living differently, and throwing my stability up in the air, but doing it in a way because I knew I had to. It was bigger than me. I knew I had to do this for you all. So that was, of course, a few years ago, but maybe you've seen similar shifts, maybe not literally, but maybe you've seen similar shifts over the past few years. Uranus is a planet of radical authenticity. It doesn't like us to pretend something that we're not, to, let's say, get stuck in something that holds us back. So maybe as we go into this weekend, or even throughout this week, if something's leaving our life, was it really meant to be there in the first place? Was it holding us back? Was it something that was, let's say, keeping us safe, but not in a good way? If something is coming into our lives, how does it reflect a story of evolution and change that's been with us over the past few years? So there we go. That's our look at the astrology for this week. Yeah, it does make sense. That's the thing that I love about astrology, is that astrology isn't just what's happening right now. It's these different interweaving, interlocking arcs of time. So that's why I like to, go back to different points of time and connect it for you all. Let's look at the astrology for each of the 12 signs, just your friendly reminder to listen for your sun sign, to listen for your rising sign as well, because they are both two different points of information that allow you to see your life from, how are things unfolding in your life, for example. So let's look at to see where Mars direct is activating your astrology this week. Let's start with Aries. So Mars is what's called your ruling planet. So it's a big player in your astrology. And for it to be retrograde since the end of October, you haven't been able to, let's say, take action in the way that you normally want to take action, Aries. So this has been a time for you to reflect, to deliberate, to look at options, to look at your choices, and also for you to have a very different relationship with your voice. Maybe in the run-up to Mars retrograde, so this would have been like end of August going into the end of October, you had a lot to say. Maybe you were a little bit impulsive or rash, or I don't know, maybe you weren't. But what did you learn during this retrograde period? What sort of thing or concept or information was illuminated for you? And that's the point of the retrograde. It's also the time that reminds you that you can't always push out, Aries. You have to pull in. You have to recuperate. You have to recharge your batteries and reflect so that you can prepare to go forward this week. And that's the other thing. Your planet has been in a bit of a long square to Neptune. And I think in a way that this foreshadows some of the bigger themes that are going to come in 2023 with Saturn going into Pisces and in a way joining Neptune. They're going to be in the same sign together. I think at the heart of some of this time, Aries, maybe it's not always been so obvious, is the deeper existential and even spiritual themes that have been present with you over the past couple of months. Maybe you're so used to getting what you want, or sort of making a choice and making it happen. And how do you reconcile it when it doesn't happen? how do you make peace when something doesn't work out? Or be at peace when something wants to leave your life, for example. But the next few years are going to be a big time to delve into these larger existential questions. And maybe the Mars retrograde has given you a time to check back in on your intuitive self and even your internal GPS. Taurus. So Taurus, Venus is your planet and it's currently up in Aquarius. And Aquarius for you, Taurus, is actually something called your career sign. So this is the point in your personal astrology where Venus is leading you out into the world, and it's about your duties and responsibilities. It's about your career. And Venus is, let's say, giving strength to a story that's been with you since 2020, and that's Saturn. Saturn's been in Aquarius. So Saturn's been in your career sign and asking you some simple questions, Taurus. What do you want to be when you grow up? And you've had Saturn really pushing you to get clearer about your role in the world. And maybe you've seen career changes over the past couple of years. Maybe you've stepped into roles. Maybe you've gotten a promotion. Maybe you've had to make some big changes in your professional life, and certainly 2022 and even 2021, maybe there have been some big career shifts because Saturn's been a little bit of a tussle with Uranus. So with Venus coming up to the lunar nodes, it activates this energy of the eclipses that's been with you throughout 2022 and maybe even the very end of 2021. With, let's say, the North Node where it is right now in Taurus, this has been a dynamic time for you, Taurus. But then again, it's been a dynamic time for you since 2018, 2019, when Uranus first arrived in your sign. Take a moment, Taurus, and look back at the version of self that you were in 2018, 2019. And maybe you see a lot of distance, a lot of miles, a lot of kilometers between the version of you back then and the version you are right now. And that's the whole point. It's for you to grow and evolve and sometimes do the scary thing and sometimes even do the hard thing. But that said, Venus is really pressing upon you to make some decisions, to commit, to head off in a certain direction. And whatever direction that is, it's building upon these larger shifts and evolutionary shifts that's been with you. And like I said, since 2018, 2019. But definitely in 2022. And I think 2022 was a dynamic and perhaps fast-paced and seismic year for you, Taurus. So this might be a week where life is turning a corner, where time is turning a corner for you, and it's really bringing you, especially as you get up to what's called Venus conjunct Saturn on January 22nd, of making some serious commitments and reaching certain personal milestones and commitments, if I didn't say it already. Gemini. So Gemini, your planet is Mercury, and it's presently retrograde in Capricorn. So Mercury in Capricorn sets a higher bar for you, and typically Gemini likes to play things fast and loose. Nothing wrong with that. We all need some freedom, some wiggle room, as they say, but Capricorn's very different. It's like, what do we need to make our commitments to? Setting the bar higher, being more mature, doing the more adult thing, so to speak. And Mercury is presently occupying a sign where it's hard to sometimes see it because it's such a big period of your life. This 16-year chapter of really doing a lot of deep emotional digging. Mercury retrograde, which happens every few months, no big deal, but it's a time to reflect, to go into the deepest parts of yourself emotionally, and maybe spaces that you've previously connected to, excised, dug into those sort of psychological and emotional crevices. Mercury is making contact to Chiron this week, so there might be a little bit of an emotional ache or emotional pain point this week that really does connect to something older, not necessarily to be, a fate, but for you to see how it connects to something larger, and maybe in a way, as Chiron helps us to do, to take something that's very personal to you, and maybe even something that's been a suffering for you, and to use it like medicine to help and to help other people grow and evolve, for example. That said, we do have Mars turning direct in Gemini, and hey, you are a Gemini. So it's maybe been a little bit interesting since August with Mars in your sign. Maybe you've had a lot of energy, maybe you've had a lot to say, maybe you even had a lot of anger. But Mars over the past 2 months has really pushed you to deliberate, to reflect, to hopefully not be so impulsive, and to, especially as you connect to the Capricorn season, maybe try to make more mature decisions and choices. That said, Mars turning direct this week may run a little bit hot, and maybe you want to rush after something. Maybe that sense of impulsivity is back, or maybe not. Maybe you've learned some powerful lessons over the past 2 months. Cancer. So Cancer, Mars is in something called your 12th. So the 12th, you have to understand, in our personal astrology is the last space, the last sign. And to have Mars there, you haven't had, typically when Mars is in the 12th, you don't have a lot of energy. You really need to take it low. You need to recuperate. You need to go on a retreat, for example. For some Cancers, this has been necessary, and it has been a little bit of a heavy past few years, especially with Saturn in what's called your 8th. And maybe Mars has been getting into some, very deep existential material over the past couple of years. But that said, you needed to reconnect with yourself, your high self, your deepest self, your spiritual self. You've needed to get back in touch with your intuition as well. And, maybe it's a little bit frustrating because you want to move forward, but Mars has been really pushing you to go behind the scenes, for example. Cancer, I would go back and wait for March 25th. I know that's a little bit of ways, but to use this time well, because when Mars goes into Cancer on March 25th, that's your kind of starting signal to start this new cycle. Mars only visits your sign once every 2 years. So this, of course, we have to get to March 1st. This is bringing you back to, I believe it's 2020, unless it's 2021. I have to look in future dates. I'll tell you the date. But really reflect, shed, let go of the past. That's the other beauty of the 12th, is that it gives us an opportunity to make, let's say, emotional and spiritual space so that we are well prepared to go into this next chapter in March. Leo, we got a lot going on this week. Let's start with Venus on the lunar nodes. Venus is actually in your what's called a relationship sign, and Venus can, let's say, make relationships more of a highlight for you. And do keep in mind, Leo, that this is you're coming to the end of almost 3 years of doing a lot of heavy lifting with relationships. This means different things for different Leos, but for some Leos, you've gotten into a serious relationship. For some Leos, you've left a serious relationship. And for other Leos, you've had to get very clear about what you want and don't want in relationship. And I mean all relationships. Remember, we are human beings and we are social creatures, and we can't do things all on our own. And that's what Saturn really wants to remind us, is that we need to have balance in our lives. We can't be 100% solo all the time. So that said, Venus is sort of bringing you out into the world. You want to connect, you want to interact, you want to socialize. But Venus is connecting to the lunar nodes. And Venus is a career planet for you. And it's something that I've talked about with Leos from time to time in the past few years, is that you're in this period, Leo, where your professional life may see a lot of big changes. All you have to do is go back and look at 2018, 2019 and maybe see a story arc there. But I've had Leo clients where you have made 180s in your professional life and maybe doing something very differently than you were back in 2018, 2019. Whatever happens this week, it's another stepping stone in this larger story of personal and professional reinvention. And professional reinvention may mean having to make some connections and to socialize and to network or make alliances, for example. That said, Mars is turning direct, and it's turning direct in something called your 11th. And the 11th is about friends and community, and maybe you've had to go back and really reflect on the power of friends and community in your life and think about how you want that area to perhaps look different or maybe live differently in 2023. That said, Mars can be a little bit hot and may bring something up between you and another person in your social circle, or maybe on a larger social theme, social issues, and social causes. What have we got? Virgo. So Virgo, your planet is Mercury, and it's presently retrograde. No big deal, but this what happens every few months, and it gives you a chance to catch your breath, to reflect, to turn inward. Right now, Mercury's in Capricorn, so do keep in mind, Virgo, that the bar is set higher for you, meaning you need to be in that role of the adult or the parent or the authority, and maybe at the other time, like maybe the times when you don't always, or maybe your relationship with that energy, maybe sometimes you don't step in that role and you need to, who knows. But that said, the bar again is set higher for you, and this part of your chart does talk about creativity, self-expression, and maybe taking your talents and even taking yourself seriously. Mercury is making a square to Chiron this week, so would it be, whatever, let's say, deeper emotional material you're experiencing, Virgo, it's connected to something deeper. And this is something that maybe is a thread throughout different points in your life, and for you to take sometimes the things that have made you suffer the most and use it like medicine to help and inspire other people. You are a Virgo, which is such a great sign for being of service to other people, and that's maybe one of the deepest ways you can be of service, is to take something very personal to you and to use it to make it into something better in the world. That said, Mars is in your career sign. So Mars has been leading the charge a bit since August, and maybe this, up until October, you had a lot of movement in your professional life. Maybe going after things on a professional level, but Mars really did either hit the brakes, pump the brakes, or pulled you back since the end of October. It doesn't mean that everything had to necessarily stop and stop for the wrong reasons, but I think Mars was trying to get you to consider other options. Is it a left? Is it a right? Is it an up or a down? And that's the beauty of being in what's called a mutable sign, is that it gives you flexibility. But that's the thing, you have to sort of consider all the options. And with the energy of Mars direct going back to Capricorn, the decision that you are probably making going forward needs to hit a higher standard, higher integrity, for you to really think about what are the milestones and achievements that you want to make in your life and even your professional life going forward. Libra, so your planet is Venus, and Venus is presently in Aquarius, and guess what other planet is in Aquarius? Saturn. So Venus is joining a story that has been with you since 2020, Libra, and that's a time where you need to take yourself and to take your talent seriously. For some Libras, and maybe this is relevant, this has been a time for parenthood. Maybe you've had children, or maybe children have come into your life in a new way. Nevertheless, with Venus and Saturn in the same sign, especially as you come up to the conjunction on January 22nd, maybe this is a time when you're really feeling some serious questions about life and questions about creativity, self-expression, maybe even parenthood, if that's relevant to you, of course. Saturn makes us feel time, it makes us feel aging, but it also makes us feel about the duties and responsibilities that we need to do in life. And you've got some serious decisions to make, maybe not right away, but certainly on the horizon. The other thing that's going on is that Venus is making an aspect to Uranus, and That's the other thing about this time, especially with Uranus in your 8th, is maybe there's some deeper emotional material that's coming up. Maybe you've seen some personal losses, or maybe this is a time where you need to look at the shadow side, meaning how do you sabotage? How do you get in the way of really expressing your talents, gifts, and abilities? And maybe because Uranus likes to turn on the lights, there are things that you're now seeing that you weren't seeing in 2022, for example. Mars is turning direct in Gemini, so this has been a sort of this focus since August about whether it's convictions, truth, faith, meaning, the things that we stand for, the things that we think are true, philosophy, maybe for some people it touches on religion, or even higher education. But when Mars is in this part of the chart, it's a big pull to see the world. And maybe for some of you, you have gone on these large journeys, foreign travel. But for some of you who can't travel, this has been a time to really look out into the world and sort of try to make sense of your place in it. And that's where that sort of philosophical element of Mars's time in your chart right now. Maybe if something comes up this week with Mars turning direct, it's about really figuring out what you believe in, what you stand for. If there's, if you get a little bit of hot-headed Mars energy, it's because you've got to really stand up for something. You've got to really stand up for something that you believe in. But, of course, you're Libra rising, so remember your diplomacy. Scorpio. So Mars is your planet, and it's been retrograde since October 30th. So Scorpio, go back to August 20th. That was the date that Mars first went into Gemini, and then it turned retrograde on October 30th. Then it's going to turn direct on the 12th. So these are like 3 moments in time that are all linked. Well, what is Gemini for you? Gemini is something called your 8th sign. And even though Scorpio, you have this reputation as a sign of being about decay and like death and endings and like the intensity of life, it isn't always easy. And even for you, Scorpio, and that's Mars's time in your 8th has really gotten into some really deep emotional material. And it's sometimes hard. And I think especially with Mars and that square to Neptune, there's been this push and pull between your relationship with power, control, your relationship with life and death, and intimacy and desire, and the things that you don't always want to reveal about yourself because it makes you vulnerable. And with Mars and that square to Neptune, you've had to reconcile that there's things that you just aren't in control of. And that's sort of the irony of Scorpio, is that it wants to be in control of everything, but it can't. It's like physically impossible. So how do you learn to let go? How do you learn to surrender, Scorpio? Yes, even you, Scorpio. And surrender is not capitulation. Surrender is allowing the energies just to be in a natural state of ebb and flow instead of trying to outmaneuver life. That said, it's like I said, it's been a heavy emotional time. It's probably since the last few months. Mars turning direct gives you some forward movement, and then by March 25th, it's out of Gemini and it's into Cancer. So we got some stuff to talk about when we get into March. I will say that Venus is your relationship planet, and it's down in your 4th. So it's in Aquarius. And the 4th is about home and family, and it's touching on these deeper themes around where is home, who is home, maybe wanting to have a family or to create a household, whatever, however you want to do family, it's up to you. And Venus is in the same sign as Saturn, so it's heavy, it's real. It's about personal milestones, emotional milestones, family milestones, relationship milestones, but it's pinging off of Uranus. And since 2018, 2019, Scorpio, you've seen a lot of changes in relationships. And this has been a time where Uranus really wants new people in your life, and maybe you've seen relationships come into your life, and maybe people you'd never thought you'd be in a relationship with. Maybe you were single for 10 years and then you're not, or maybe this has really evolved the narrative of how you connect and interact and socialize with people. So this is a week where Venus is at the bending. That's what we say when a planet is square the nodes, and things bend. Things are at a crossroads. Maybe you feel like life is at a crossroads, and maybe some of the things that are happening this week and maybe even into next week touch on larger life milestones. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, so you're what's called a fire sign. Jupiter rules you, and Jupiter's been in Aries, I believe, since the end of December. So this is a time for you to really continue, and this takes you into May, to continue to really get into the fire and the passion and the creativity of what makes you you. And Sagittarius, it's a fire sign. It's the last fire sign. So its job is to hold the light for the world, meaning to show people the path, to illuminate things, to show people the world, philosophy, truth, meaning, faith, and to be inspirational. It's supposed to be a very inspirational sign. So this is a time when all these themes might be coming into your life. So how do you embody that? How do you live that? How do you be that, Sagittarius? And if the fire has gone out, and it has been a difficult past few years, Sagittarius, how do you get back to that spark, that flame? Because it's so important, for example. And maybe you've had your faith tested, maybe you've lost faith, but Jupiter is trying to give you that sense of confidence and faith and even creativity and self-expression back to your life. Mars is turning direct in your relationship sign. It has been in Gemini, your relationship sign, since August 20th. And pay attention to the story around August 20th, and then when Mars turned retrograde on October 30th. What was going on with relationships, you and other people, not just romantic relationships, but all relationships? Was there an argument, or was there somebody come into your life? Has there been a sense of frustration over the past few months? Well, now Mars is turning direct. So it's forward movement with somebody in your life, a sense of power, drive, action. Mars is the planet in your astrology that talks about sort of like this deeper philosophical themes, and maybe you want to have that sort of deeper connection with somebody in your life. That's the thing about Gemini energy, is that it typically just wants to be like, let's just talk about everything. But there is a part of you that wants to get down into like a deeper connection with somebody. And so maybe Mars, turning direct will finally give you that deeper connection with somebody. And I think that's been hard, especially with Mars square Neptune, is that you've had to feel into the spaces where you can't always control the universe or sort of control other people. It's sort of having to allow things to happen right now. Capricorn. So Capricorn, your planet is Saturn, and it's coming to the end of its time in Aquarius. And I want you to pay attention to this, especially as we get into February, is that when a planet gets to the end of a sign, especially Saturn, you sort of see the result of what you've been building. And this has been such a time for you, Capricorn, to learn about the material world, your material needs, your material security, to make investments, to make big purchases, to shift your relationship with money and income. And if it has been a struggle over the past couple of years, how has Saturn taught you to put things back into balance and to even prioritize your own needs? It's been a little bit of a tough time because you've had Saturn in that long square to Uranus. And so it says the person that you were even a couple of years ago is probably very different than the person that you are now. That said, we have Venus on the lunar nodes this week. And currently the lunar nodes for you are in the signs of what's called the 5th and the 11th. So identity, self, not versus, but sort of how it connects to the larger whole. Friends, community, your relationship with the group, collective, for example. So this is a turning point week for you, and something where maybe you have to make some serious decisions. So these larger themes around value and worth, your value and worth, your value and worth, and sort of part of the greater whole. And especially as you're in this time of awakenings and transformations in your life. Then we have Mars direct, and for you, Mars is a planet that digs into deeper emotional material, family, home, instinctual patterns, especially when Mars is part of like the home environment. It's like these deep emotions that are just almost like infantile, and I mean that in a neutral way. It's like we all need our needs met, and what happens when we don't get our needs met? What sort of deeper emotions bubble up? That said, Mars is turning direct in something called your 6. So this is focusing on your health, your wellness, your emotional health and wellness, getting back to projects, seeing projects start to move forward, needing to get back to work. Maybe you've seen something stall over the past couple of months, but and this is also time for you to put some energy into your physical health, and this includes getting some fresh air, maybe even some exercise, and how that sort of ticks back, especially with Mercury and Capricorn, you making some serious decisions this week. Aquarius is almost your season, which means the sun is in Capricorn, and Capricorn is something called your 12th. And when you reach the end of something, you reach the end of the zodiac, and in this case, your personal zodiac, it's time to shed. It's time to let go. It's time to be very reflective about the year that you've had, what worked, what didn't work, and to clear some emotional and psychic space so that you're not bringing that with you into the new year. That said, we've got a couple of things happening. Number one, Venus, which is a major planet in your astrology, it's in your sign, and it's making something called a square to the nodes. This might be a week for you where the doors of life are opening and closing. This is all in advance of Venus coming up to Saturn on January 22nd. This is connecting to these eclipses that we've been having, and in your case, Aquarius, the eclipses that talk about home and family, Taurus, which is we had back in October, November, April, May, but also your direction in life, your career, your professional duties and responsibilities. So this might be a milestone week where you have to, again, make some serious decisions. Then there's Mars in Gemini, and Gemini for you is something called your 5th sign. So Mars, since August 20th, has been getting into these larger themes about self, like what makes you you, what's your talents, your gifts, and your abilities. Mars pulled back since October 30th, and so it's sort of made you more reflective on these deeper themes around creativity and self and identity. And Mars is a career planet for you, so maybe you've seen something not move as fast in your professional life since the end of October. But that said, this is all in advance of there's going to be a Aquarius new moon. I think it's the 21st of January, followed by Uranus direct on the 22nd of January and Venus conjunct Saturn. So you're coming up to a big week in your astrology, a time of new beginnings, a time of pivot points, and even big personal milestones. Finally, Pisces. So here we are, we're at the end of the zodiac, and Pisces for you, Capricorn season, starts to bring you to the end of your personal calendar. It's about friends, it's about community, it's about looking out into the world. That said, you've got Mars, which is in Gemini, which is down at the base of your chart. Gemini is what's called your 4th sign, and the 4th sign supports your life. It's the pillar, it's home, it's family, it's the household. Go back to August 20th and even October 30th, and what's the common story, give or take a few days, around home and family? Has somebody moved in? Has somebody moved out? Have you been getting into these deeper themes about emotional security? Like, I need this. Like, why am I not getting this? Sometimes when Mars is in this part of the chart, we can really tick into that, that deep, almost like childlike or even infantile emotion or even rage, for example. But Mars has really been prioritizing on a deep gut level, instinctual level, your needs, and maybe even bringing up these memories about home and family, past and mom and dad. Mars is in this long square to Neptune, and Neptune's in Pisces. So it's like, where do you fit in the mix? Like, how do you get your needs met, and where do you learn to find the balance between you and other people? And sometimes I love you Pisces, but sometimes boundaries are not always your strong suit. So how have people crossed those boundaries, and maybe the complicated emotions that come up when somebody's boundaries are not honored, or maybe you've even lost yourself, for example. But that said, pay attention to the story around home, and maybe there's been changes in the household, maybe there's been a move, or maybe it's been just an internal shift and move for you. That said, Mercury is a big player in your astrology, and with Mars turning direct, it's sort of threading back to Mercury's time, retrograde in Capricorn, and maybe you've got some serious decisions to make, serious decisions about your future, serious decisions about a connection, friends, community, larger social themes, social issues, social causes, and where is home and who is home, and how does that even connect to something larger in the world? So there you go. That is your look at the astrology of January 9th through 15th, 2022. My name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm an astrologer again here in the New York City area, and I get to connect to you all live every week. So if you want to follow me more, you can go to empoweringastrology.com, although my website this past couple of days has been having some Mercury retrograde issues and a server error. Hopefully that will get fixed very soon. So empoweringastrology.com. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Spotify. And for those that have already gotten my Astrology of 2023 webinar, thank you very much. You can still get it. The link is in the show notes. You can go to empoweringastrology.com/webinars. Thank you all again. I see again some familiar faces, and until next week, we've got some astrology to talk about next week with Uranus turning direct, but until then, take care, be well, bye-bye.